Good morning, or should I say good evening to some of you around the world. It's a beautiful autumn morning here in the winelands in South Africa. It's wonderful to be back. We had a really exciting first day of the Future of Wine Tourism webinar yesterday, and we look forward to continue the conversation. In a few seconds, I'll introduce today's panel to you, and I just want to start off by saying and sharing the message that's coming through that the industry globally is suffering unimaginable loss at the moment. And who would have thought in the beginning of 2020 and a new decade that just 3 months into this year, countries from around the world would close their borders and big attractions and busy cities would become ghost towns. So our world has been turned upside down, and we have a challenge ahead of us. And I think as many entrepreneurs like myself, we've always worked in an uncertain world. And like before, we need to find our way here and navigate through the uncertainty and create a new world in which we can operate, not just to survive, but to thrive. Yes. My name is Mariette du Toit-Helmbold. I'm the Chief Destineer at Destinate, and it's my privilege to facilitate the Future of Wine Tourism webinar. We are joined by attendees literally from all over the world, as far as Chile, the UK, USA, Portugal, Spain, Canada, New Zealand, Australia, and of course, lots of businesses here from South Africa. Welcome, everybody. We also have students attending from South Africa in the wine industry, as well as from Italy and other countries. So welcome to our students as well. And I think it's such an exciting time to be involved in wine and to shape a brand new future.
You mean Tuesday?
So welcome, everybody. Our aim is to present a webinar that's packed with practical and thoughtful advice, guidance, and intervention to assist the industry gear up for a future that is uncertain and where our freedom of movement and human interaction will fundamentally and forever change. So we're going to jump straight into our first session and into our panel discussion. And we're looking at a global perspective this morning. And we are joined by Sandra Carvao, Chief of Market Intelligence and Competitiveness at the United Nations World Tourism Organization. Thank you for joining us, Sandra. Paul Mabray, wine revolutionary and wearer of good shoes and all sorts of good attire. Robert Joseph, the wine thinker, joining us from the UK. Welcome, Robert. And we're going to kick off with Sandra first. Tourism is one of the hardest hit sectors in the world. There's no mistaking that. And the impact of lockdown and COVID-19 has wiped out much of the hard-earned tourism growth that we've achieved over the last years. Can you just provide us a brief overview of the global picture right now and what some of the most likely scenarios are that you are working towards?
Thank you, Mariette, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you from different corners of the world today. I think it's really something unprecedented, as you mentioned. We've seen that as a response to try and curb the pandemic. Obviously, national governments have taken very strong lockdown measures, and those have translated also into significant travel restrictions. For the first time in history, we have 100% of destinations worldwide with some kind of travel restriction imposed in their borders, which in most cases is a totally closed to international traffic. Obviously, this adds to the national restrictions in terms of domestic movement. I think what's striking as well is that UNWTO is doing a monitoring of travel restrictions on a weekly basis, and we've seen that apart from 100% of destinations closed at this moment, there's around 25% of those destinations who have travel restrictions in place for the next 3 months, 40% that have travel restrictions in place for the next 2 months. So it's not only something that obviously we've seen from the mid-March, but I think looking forward, we need to consider that we will have a very gradual and uneven opening of borders around the world. What has that meant for us? We're definitely one of the hardest hit sectors in terms of no movement. Well, we all know hotels closed, planes grounded, borders closed. Our data shows for the first 3 months already a decline of 22% in international tourist arrivals. It's unparalleled. There's no moment in history where we've seen that happening. Even with the September 11 and SARS, and we don't anticipate a year that unfortunately will look like any of what we've seen. We're not doing any forecasts at this moment because we do know it's a very uncertain situation depending on the evolution of the pandemic, depending on the opening of borders, but also when we open borders, it's going to depend very much on how consumer confidence and discretionary spending is coming up. So I think there's several factors to consider in the scenarios. What we've done is look into international traveler from here to the end of the year. And we do expect that if borders start opening slowly from July onwards, we will still end the year at minus around 60%, which if you think about is nothing that we've seen or even could think about it in the past. If that movement takes longer, then obviously the impact will be much more significant. There's one point that everyone talks about, obviously the domestic market, and I'm sure you're going to talk about it later, but our big concern at this moment is obviously also the destinations which are heavily dependent on international travelers.
Yeah, and South Africa is certainly one of those destinations where we have for many years been over-reliant on the international market. We spent significant time yesterday speaking about the domestic market in particular, and I think with every crisis comes an opportunity, and we have an opportunity to really focus our energy collectively on our domestic audiences and our local citizens, and how do we transform our industry and our tourism offering to particularly also looking at wine tourism to cater for a domestic and a local tourist. We had the hot debate around dual pricing and what kind of value add, local and domestic travelers need. So anybody that missed yesterday's session, we will be sharing the recordings and some insights post the 3 days of webinars. So many businesses won't survive this crisis. That's a fact, unfortunately, but some are rising to the challenge and responding with really innovative ways in which to retain their customers and also build a new audience and build and bring in new future customers and realigning their businesses to be future fit. Can you single out a few examples, Paul, and tell us what the industry should be focusing their energy on right now? Because there's a lot we can focus on. It's noisy out there, just there's so many webinars happening and so much being said on social media, but help us to kind of gather our thoughts a little bit and narrow down what we should focus on if you can.
Well, I think that now is the time to build infrastructure for the preparations for, later sales seasons. This is the time to build. This is the time to catch up where the wine industry has ignored digital at our own peril for decades. The concepts of social media, mobile, e-commerce are not new. I mean, e-commerce has been around for 2 decades. The iPhone was invented in 2006, so that's 14 years. Social media was in 2009, so that's 11 years. These are not new phenomenons. They're just ones we've chosen to not necessarily lean into for a myriad of reasons. As it relates to winery business, we really were over-reliant on enotourism, which is a tourism, a magnificent piece of thing, but stabilizing our business and retaining them and touching customers when they're at home was something that we don't have a lot of muscle memory, a lot of resources or people skills to unlock that. So now's the time to invest those. I know that sounds scary, but the alternative is waiting another year for the traffic to hit up to the regular peak times. And in fact, us in California, we recognized, and we should have known this before the pandemic, is that tasting model is very brittle. As you know, in both Australia and in California, we had terrible fires, blackouts, earthquakes. I mean, for God's sake, the next thing we're going to have is a plague, of moths or something like that. So I think that the simple steps of that digital transformation is what every winery that I'm seeing in the United States is really leaning into. We're very fortunate that we're seeing a real boon in online sales. I mean, some wineries are seeing $1 million every 2 weeks. What that's done for the United States leadership is they see this as now a viable channel. It was an unfed, unrealized channel in the past. It was like the racehorse that never got a meal and never ran hard, and suddenly it's got all this pressure on it. That demand was always there, to be honest with you. It wasn't increased. Yeah, it definitely had an impact because COVID, we have to buy online, but the demand was always there. We just never really tapped into it. So it's time to invest in digital for sure.
Absolutely. And it's never too late to start, right?
It's never too late.
It's never too late.
It gets later and later though. There's a concept called technical debt. And there's also a learning debt. Technology keeps moving into the future. The gap between learning gets wider and wider and more expensive. Think of it as a credit card that you don't pay down. At some point, you can never pay it down because it's too expensive.
Correct. So, and your competitors are just too far ahead. So I think this is an optimal opportunity right now for small business in particular to invest in e-commerce and get themselves online so that they are able to compete with some of the guys who will obviously have bigger market share.
And let me before you go on, it shouldn't just be e-commerce. I mean, we should talk about digital as its macro ecosphere. It's social, it's advertising, it's engagement with customers. It's actually the psychological mindset of focusing on retaining those customers, not just getting them, but selling to them a second, a third, a fourth time. And that's something that we need to lean into. It's not just a tool set. It's not just adding e-commerce. I want to be very clear about that because that makes it a project. And that's not part of your business and core and essential. It's not a cultural change. So I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's really fundamental. That's more than that.
Absolutely. I think that's gold there. It's not, and I think for many people, it's something that they outsource to an IT guy or a PR person. And as you said, it needs to infiltrate every segment of the business and really become a new way of operating. And you mentioned something really important about working with existing customers, people who have visited. And yesterday we spoke about this. There's an incredible loyalty within wine and wine tourism, that kind of ecosystem. Once you've visited a winery and you've fallen in love with that experience, you will end up buying more of that wine. It's a fact. And so many of us in the wine industry, we don't pay enough attention to the visitor who's taken that effort, some of them traveling from around the world to visit your winery. And we just kind of say, hi, how are you? Here's some wine, and we pour it into a glass. And what are we doing to engage them post that visit? How are we retaining them? And how, more importantly, are we working with them right now to make sure that they're there to do that first online sale once we get on ourselves organized?
And even if it's not an online sale, how to proselytize and how to share about your brand to other consumers and how to keep in contact with them so that when you do end up in market, they're ready and prepared to purchase.
Absolutely. So, Robert, will the increased cost of international travel, which is most likely going to be coupled with the reduced disposable income caused by the financial downturn, lead to a change in the focus towards more local visitors? And will this mean a need for a different kind of wine tourism experience?
Well, the only thing we know is that we don't know anything. We don't know how flat this is going to be. We don't know whether the effect is going to be the same from country to country. China, for example, may bounce back, is already bouncing back internally in a way that maybe some other countries won't. So the first thing is, I don't think we just say, look, the world, and Sandra, I'm sure, is going to have some input on that. So that's the first thing I'd say. The second thing is I'd like to drill down a moment to talk about what is wine tourism. I've done a number of books over the years, and one of them was a guide to the world for wine lovers. It was a wine lover's guide to the world, and it had wineries, wine bars, wine shops across the globe. Was it a bestseller? No. Is there a mass of people across the world who are sitting down thinking, I want to go and do some wine tourism? No. There are a lot of people who want to do some tourism, and then as part of the tourist experience, they're coming to the Cape, they're coming to South Africa. Will I look at wild animals? Well, actually, maybe if I'm going to Cape Town, I'm not necessarily going to go on a safari as easily as I might somewhere else. But what else can I do? Oh, there's wineries. That's the same in Australia, somewhere else. There's a great line I got from a tour operator in New South Wales in Australia at a conference. And he said, my average customer wants to see 1.5 wineries. And I get, how does that work? And he said, it's very simple. If the second one is like the first one, they don't want to see it. So basically, once I've seen barrels and I've seen vineyards and I've stood around in a tasting room, I've had the experience. Now, if the second place has got an art exhibition, if it's got some cars, if it's got something interesting for the kids to do, etc. But the first thing I'd say is that wine, across the world of wine tourism, most of California invented it really in modern terms, but most of the world has come to it at various stages. And we're all focused on thinking that people, A, want to buy wine. That's the European model. So wine tourism in Europe is a barrel and a bottle and some glasses, and here's a glass of it, where's your money? Or the more recent Californian iteration, which is that people want to sit in a room for half an hour, and be poured wine and be talked at. And yes, there are people who are going to do that, but there's a limited number of them, and there's a limited number of occasions they're going to do it. So if they've come to tasting room 1 in winery 1, they may not be available to go to the tasting room in the next winery or the one after. And I think we're beginning to see that happen in the States. So first question is, what is wine tourism? It is an entertainment. It is part of the process of, I could go to the beach, I could go to the museum, I could go to a winery, and we never forget that. Secondly, are people going to be traveling? I don't think it's just cost. I think we may end up in all sorts of ways. We've all been locked down for a while. We may go to our local, it doesn't matter where we're in America or in Britain or wherever. We may say, gosh, I want to travel the world because I've been locked down. Or we may say, actually, I'm going to go down the road. Overseas is scary. It's risky. They had more disease over there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there may be some social changes. So as far as I'm concerned, I think that, and this ties in with what Paul was saying in terms of digital, it may well be, and I was in a conference session yesterday, we were talking to a very, very well-known California winery, and they're talking about pop-ups. They're talking about taking themselves to the customers rather than the other way around. So to me, what I see happening is a gang of South African wineries, for example, coming to London or New York or wherever with VR headsets. And VR headsets are clunky and they're horrible and so on, but they're the best thing we've got at the moment. And if we can afford to do a better 3D experience, we will. But actually bring people to the place. Not just walk me through the vineyards, because once I've walked through one vineyard, I've done it. Show me other things. Walk me through Cape Town. Take me into some cafes. Introduce me to some people. And actually give me the non-tangible experience that makes me want then to spend my money to get on a plane and go there. And the model for that, I think, has been worked on for quite a little while in real estate. Because if you want to sell a Chinese billionaire a piece of real estate anywhere in the world, in Shanghai, you sit him down in a room and you give him a headset and you walk him around the apartment and you let him get on the balcony and he can look and he can see where the swimming pool is and so on. And he will actually give his deposit there and then. And to me, I think that tourism, and again, Sandra, I'm sure has got a lot of input on this, but I think that wine tourism, we need to think a lot more about that aspect of digital behavior than some of the others. The simplicity of buying online is a very clunky way. And my guess is that we're sitting here in a Zoom, every one of us, I'm sure, has done lots of Zoom sessions. How many of us have done lots of Zoom sessions 6 months ago? It's new. In 3 years' time, or whenever the next of these kind of events it will happen, and it will happen, who's to say that we won't actually have holograms that we'll be talking to instead of screens? I'm going to bet that's going to happen. So I think we need to think way outside our current boxes. I don't think anyone's doing it right yet, but I think a lot of people are thinking about it.
And I think you mentioned something that's very important, is that, and I know Paul also just commented on that, is that such a huge chunk of our business, for wineries in particular, is sit within a radius of 1 or 2 hours around us. So that immediate a visitor, an audience that we have within quite a close proximity is a very important customer. And in this digitalization that we are entering, how are we involving them in that process as our advocates, as our first travelers when lockdown ends, bring the kids, you know, all of us are craving to reconnect with our most loved ones that we haven't seen. I haven't seen my parents for almost 3 months. You know, I haven't seen some of my best friends for a long time, and I can't think of anything better than sharing a good bottle of wine in one of our beautiful wineries, which has got the space and the environment for us to enjoy that moment quite safely. So I think we often get quite philosophical about who the customer is, and actually often that customer is sitting right under our nose. And as you say, the future, we will see rapid changes in technology, and keeping up with that now and really looking at trends and being adaptable and fluid as an industry is absolutely crucial. And one of the aspects that's becoming more and more important, Sandra, I think it's one of the things that the UNWTO has been driving for a significant amount of years. And I think, again, a pandemic like this, a crisis, puts the spotlight on our world and our environment and how fragile it all is, right? It is so incredibly fragile. And some might argue futile. You know, is it even worth all the effort? And we've seen how quickly our environments are recovering from the huge impact that us humans have on the world. So sustainable tourism is more important than ever before. And one of the messages coming through that we're picking up, certainly through social media, is that when people do return to traveling, it will be with a far greater consciousness. We know we've had the conscious traveler. We know there's a certain segment of the market that have been ambassadors for sustainable tourism, you know, the greenies, the people who really care. But I think more and more of us now will look very carefully at the impact that we have on our world, on host communities. How can we redesign wine tourism? And I know in a country like South Africa, our biodiversity and our sustainability is one of our key selling points. But globally, how can a wine tourism industry contribute to a more sustainable tourism experience?
Thank you. I think everything is really connected, and the things that we've been talking about in terms of the importance of the community and what Paul was mentioning in terms of digital. I think there's two important points here. One is obviously the impact in terms of climate change, environmental commitments. And I think that it's more and more clear that people will be also probably going more local in that spirit of, you know, the world has probably shifted your perception of the value of local, of the value of your own products. And I think in that sense, wine tourism will probably gain from that, because we might see a reconnection with your land, with your community. And I think that will lead necessarily to that need of, you know, within the UN, we talk very much about build back better. So this is the opportunity to build back better in the different aspects, either environmental or sustainable. And I think to the point that we link also sustainability with competitiveness, because for many destinations and many companies, they're seen as apart pillars, and more they need to be embedded. I'm more competitive if I can show that I'm caring about my community, that I'm giving back, that I am doing my processes in line with sustainable practices, that my workers are actually being paid fairly, that their working conditions are good, because also when they explain what they do, that's going to make a difference if they feel part of the process. And I'd like to bring here the concept that for us is very important, which is about destination management. And this comes to what we were saying before, and to Robert's point, it's true. It's like there's little people that actually go and visit 3 wineries in a row. And if they do, it's because there's really something different about them. So we need the destination to bring that extra value. And that extra value is about the gastronomy, the culture, whatever is intrinsic to the destination. And we still don't see that much happening. I think it's normal because I think wine tourism grew up based on wineries opening little by little to have visitors. And now we're in a phase of saying, oh, wait, you know, this is an ecosystem. I need to build that ecosystem around. That was actually one of the big discussions we had in our last wine tourism conference in Chile. Mariette was with us, that how do we bring the whole players to actually build that in a coordinated way that's valuable for the community and also for the visitor.
Fantastic. I think you mentioned one thing that I want to us to pause on for a second is, you know, a lot of emphasis is put on the impact that visitors have, the safety of visitors going, you know, post-lockdown, you know, what are we doing to help visitors to have a more safe experience? And you touched on our workforce, on the people within the industry. You know, ultimately, if we can't bring the people working within the value chain of wine tourism on board and educate and support them so that they also feel safe and looked after by the businesses that they're working in, and putting their health at risk in many cases to be serving our visitors. I don't know if you want to add to that point, because I think it's sometimes we miss that important cog in the wheel.
I think it's very interesting because I think this pandemic brought that point very high-up in the different sectors, not only in tourism, but you know, here in Spain, there's, and I'm sure in all the countries, there's a big discussion on that we're not giving the better conditions to the people doing very important jobs for our society. And I think in tourism, it's the same. You know, one of the things that is very discussed is informality in the sector, is the need to actually step up the conditions in which people work in terms of remuneration, in terms of engagement, in terms of skills. You know, Paul was mentioning about technology. That's part of contributing also to upskilling the capacity of people, is one important point. And as we now, I like very much what Paul said in the beginning, it's time to build up and catch up. I think training for staff at this moment, for those companies that can do it, and ideally that can be supported by governments to do so, it's the really opportunity that we have in front of us.
Absolutely. And I think there's a growing need for visitors to be able to see more transparently how we operate as an industry. And I think, again, this pandemic has highlighted the need for evidence-based visual marketing. You know, we for a long time, we've become experts at putting that perfect Instagrammable moment to the world, and portraying our destinations almost as perfect plastic places, you know, that we don't do anything wrong. And as visitors, you know, we want to see more, we want to know, and we want to have visual evidence of what you're doing, not just to safeguard us when we visit, but what are you doing in terms of the environment, in terms of the host community, in terms of all of those elements that make up the tourism destination. So I think that's going to become more and more important as we navigate our way forward. So Paul, back to you, and back to this whole concept of entering into a new phase where we really take the digital world more seriously, and not just from an e-commerce perspective. But you've seen a massive surge in online sales in the US. And what are some of the lessons that we can learn as destinations, perhaps like South Africa? And I know I've spoken to colleagues in Chile and other places where online sales has been something that we've also been trying to get off the ground for many years. And know that this is an opportunity for us now. How can we repackage and grow wine tourism, not just the sale of the bottle of wine, which is one thing, but the whole wine tourism experience? How do we move that into the e-commerce space and into the online space?
Well, they're the same thing, just spelled differently. But let me rewind a bit. I think there were some really interesting things that Sandra and Robert said. I mean, I think one of the things, look, I live in Napa. This is my home. The thing that we realized most about this pandemic is the symbiotic nature of our community and the sister businesses we have, whether the restaurant, hotels, everything. And I think that that's going to be the model that Napa will take, and Sonoma and Paso Robles, which is how do we build a synergistic community that is able to work together and flow differently? Because otherwise, it doesn't help if we have people that are sick at the restaurants, not the wineries, and the social. There's a lot that's going to change around this, but without the vacuum of one of these key pillars, Napa is not that interesting. And part of that is addressing this concept of sustainability, which is not about just the environment. It's about how we treat our employees, our vendors, our partners, our community, that full sustainability model. And a lot of that's going to be reconciling the two sins that wine has in the wine industry. I mean, it's, as a destination location, it is a very carbon heavy concept. And how do we lessen that, whether we return it in other ways or we reduce the traffic through our communities? How do we pay back down carbon taxes to offset things, I think is a key component. And then wine by its nature is a carbon heavy product. We ship South African wines to California and then back again to New York. I mean, we're passing wine all over the world back and forth. And whether we want to admit to it or not, that's the magic of wine, right? I want to taste a piece of, the Vinelands. I want to understand what a Burgundy and Bordeaux wine tastes like and live in that place by having that flavor in my mouth. And that's the magic of wine, but it's also our sin. As it relates to bringing it, look, digital is, it's so funny that we treat it as if it's some alien organism. If you look at every one of us on this panel, we all have a smartphone. We probably use Google a bunch of times today. We probably bought something in the last 40 hours online. And I know all of us are on social media. And then you ask how many wineries or businesses are doing those things or feel that they have a good aptitude for that, including eno-tourism. And there's not a lot of that. We're not investing in those channels for some odd reason. I don't know what that piece is. I think some of it is the natural success of our industries. It's beautiful and wonderful to come to South Africa. It's beautiful and wonderful to go to Italy in the wine region. It's beautiful to see Reka's Prosecco winery, or come to Napa. So I think that our success, accidental, has bred this sort of apathy to what you're saying about marketing digitally.
100%. Robert, can you add to that?
A little careful. Sorry, is that again? Yes. I think we need to be a little careful. The Kool-Aid, actually, Kool-Aid is normally portrayed as horrible, nasty, chemical, bad stuff. Actually, I think that Kool-Aid can be orange juice. Kool-Aid can be lovely wine. It can be just something that you just get a taste for and you want to drink. Now, one of the Kool-Aids, and this is going to be controversial, is the whole sustainability story. Those of us who have drunk it believe it, and we think that everybody else is going to believe it and everyone else is out there. And isn't that great? Wonderful. I look after my workers and I look after the environment and I've got solar panels and so on. And everyone's going to appreciate that. I've just written something in a different subject, but not entirely. Jamie Good, the Naked Chef. Our top celebrity chefs in the UK all talked about how unhappy life chickens, battery chickens, cage chickens live in the UK. Our televisions were absolutely full of it. And the most recent statistic I've seen is that yes, British consumers now buy 3.5% of the total chicken market is now free range, which means that 96.5% still live in cages. Lots of people are talking sustainability. Lots of people are talking all the green stuff. I'm not necessarily sure that out of every 100 people who are going to go traveling, that is going to be absolutely top of their list when it comes to it. And I also think that when we go to the Caribbean, for example, if you do, the number of people who are very happy to go to those places and live in resorts, which have absolutely no relationship with the people who live and work in that place, apart from them coming in and turning down the beds and serving in the bars. So I think we should be careful about not being too over-romantic about this and imagining that just by doing that, it's going to tick all the boxes. And by the same token, sorry, Paul?
Agreed. Yeah, agreed. Can I push back on you just for a hot second there? I totally agree with you. I think that we definitely drink our own Kool-Aid, but I can say from an American perspective, the good and bad actors are being elevated very quickly, people that took subsidies and laid off employees. I mean, so it's this black swan event is almost exposing, exacerbating our attention to that factors, at least in the US base, right? And I'm not saying that that's sustainable long-term, using that word ironically, but the reality of it is it's exposing this, and we're a luxury industry. And everyone wants to eat the fat cats. It's really about all the 1%, and where there's a lot of that going on here. So we have to over-index on that side, especially. So
but picking up on that, please don't take it the wrong way. I'm not saying don't do the green stuff. I'm working on some projects as a consultant, and I've got a brand called Greener Planet and so on. So as far as I'm concerned, I'm all for it, but I'm very aware, that anything that I do or you do, so you're in South Africa, you go sustainable, I'm doing it in France. There are people doing it in California and Oregon, everywhere. So we're all going to have the same green badge soon enough, point one. And secondly, to Paul's point that he just made, I think the awareness of that value is going to be, not say limited, but you'll see where it comes from. And there are going to be globally people who are going to look and tick the boxes. So you're going to have people from Sweden, for example, saying, I'm going to go to South Africa because they're greener than Australia, for argument's sake. But you're also, and I think this is crucial to Paul's point, it's a local thing. What you're talking about is Americans reading in the media in America about American companies not paying their workers or whatever. And I think that, to your point in terms of a region of any producer or a region within South Africa, I think your reputation locally within your own backyard is going to be crucial, especially in a world in which we all read about what people are reading about locally. So I think the people who are doing good, and we've seen that. I've been coming to South Africa for a very long time, so I remember the way things used to be. There are some people who've done some great work and are doing great work over the last few years, and in terms of at a social level and empowerment and diversity and so on. I think we're going to see more of that. And in terms of the local backyard, what fascinates me is that I've got French producers and American producers saying, how can I sell my wine in Africa? How can I sell my wine in Kenya and Nigeria and Burkina Faso and so on? And to me, I think that one of the futures for South Africa is maybe to spend a little bit less effort on trying to persuade Londoners and New Yorkers to buy your wine, and maybe spending a little bit more effort on actually persuading people for whom wine is, let's face it, a new product, who don't have to travel as far, and for whom actually South Africa could be a very attractive environment. Because what I can tell you is that I've got people in other countries who are looking at those parts of the world as a target.
That's such a great point there. And we spent a significant amount of time yesterday talking about growing the domestic and regional market, and in a country like South Africa, wine has been for a long time, perceived by all, factually preserved for the elect few, and seen as a luxury or as an inaccessible category. And I know we're not alone in the world. I know there's other destinations that share those same challenges. And I think this is a fantastic opportunity to really relook the way in which we've positioned wine and bring it down to earth, make it more accessible, and make it fun, for crying out loud. I mean, people don't want to just hear from the experts. And we're going to be spending a bit of time later this afternoon talking about virtual events, etc. And whether, and I don't know if, you guys have all been part of virtual tastings and seen them, but some of them are terribly drab. And we need to really think about, and I think it's back to Paul's point, is how do we make this more exciting and real? Because as you say, we are on our phones a lot. We're having fun on social media, we're sharing and we're having a good time. But when it comes to pouring a glass of wine, we get all stiff and formal and professional.
Well, if I could just...
Sorry, Robert.
Well, I think to your point, if you listen to the wine fraternity, so they will say, refer to wines like Barefoot in California or 19 Crimes and so on, and you will see the grimace on their face. And you say, oh, I was in a session yesterday at Rosé and whatever. It's just, we don't want to go there. We don't like Pinot Grigio. We don't like Prosecco. We don't, all the things that we don't want. We want terroir. We want complication. We want vintages and so on, which is fine. it's great. It's part of the wine story, and for the people who are doing it, and it's been very successful for them. But let's not forget the millions of people who actually buy a bottle because it's got a picture of a foot on it and it tastes good. And Gallo on their website tells you what to blend it with to make a cocktail.
Absolutely.
And that's the kind of thing that we don't do. So to me, actually open up a wine cocktail bar in Joburg, in Pretoria, and say, hey, look, this is wine is fun. This is stuff that you enjoy with the braai on the beach or whatever. It doesn't have to be.
We should be a big tent.
Down and be formal about.
We should be a big tent industry for sure. I agree. I think we should be a big tent industry and let people want to arrive as long as we're, helping them when they need those apex moments.
And they may not take my point.
They may never take the journey.
They may not take the journey. They may actually stop at that level. But if that's actually, and I really want to say this because you are shipping so much cheap South African bulk wine overseas to be blended with fruit juice or fruit flavoring and so on in France and whatever. Actually, just take that stuff and sell it locally for a higher price and give some pleasure to your own people in your own backyard.
Spot on. On that note, I want us to talk a little bit about direct to consumer and spend a few minutes on this hot topic. And we've seen, obviously, this is one of the big opportunities that's coming through this crisis, and being able to accelerate that and hugely important. So we know that the whole sales channel and sales chain of wine will be disrupted forever potentially, as it is for tourism. And we know there's the jury is out in terms of how big online travel agencies will adapt to this. Essentially, we want to go direct as consumers more and more. And obviously in countries where you can actually buy wine at the moment, that is, that's happening, but we will have our moment to come soon, hopefully. How will this lead to a change in the way wineries handle visitors? And how can we make direct to customer a more normal thing? And in fact, number one on our priority list. Robert.
I will pick up on that because I think one of the things, and this came up yesterday talking to, again, it was a closed session, so I can't say who it was, but this was a very big California winery that sees about 100,000 visitors a year. And they have got been talking to local restaurants who have been locked down and been closed and so on. And they've got into distributing wine and food. Now, legally, they were restricted from doing that in the past. Now they can. I think that we need to start thinking outside the wine box. In Britain, for example, we all hear about the independent wine merchants, and they're doing well and they're delivering wine. Yes, but so is Tesco. Our supermarkets are delivering wine with the soap powder, with everything else, in the same way that we bought wine in the store with the soap powder and everything else. I think that the clever wineries are going to get together with the appropriate food people, and possibly appropriate people in other fields as well, and say, right, actually, you buy in, and that ties into my sustainable question as well. If you buy into the sustainable honey and the sustainable cheese and maybe the sustainable meat, and then you bring the wine as part of that, rather than being siloed. And I'm fascinated by the way that the spirits people, the beer people, have been eating the wine lunch, or drinking the wine glass, if you like, by taking a lot of our values and a lot of things that we think of ours, and people paying huge prices for bottles of gin that cost very little to produce. But actually, they're some of the areas of wine that they've appropriated. I think we should actually piggyback and say, hey, you're paying this much for a bottle of gin, buy a bottle of wine at the same time as the gin and buy some cheese with it and have that package delivered. And I can see that working very well. But I also think that we need to, and Paul is going to be much better at this than me, if you think of digital online purchasing as a website, with you ticking boxes and giving your credit card at the bottom, I think that's 2010 thinking. I think that we're moving far forward, and I'm going to certainly hand over to Paul to talk about the way that's going to evolve. But I think we need to be looking one stage ahead. I've got a Chinese influencer, Terry Xu, on our Real Business of Wine session on Friday, who's talking about a new platform from Tencent that I've never heard of. There's all these new things coming in, and you've really got to keep up with them, as Paul said. But Paul, I'd hand over to you on this.
Yeah, I mean, look, direct to consumer looks the same as it did, at least in the US base, since 1995. I mean, it has not adapted. A wine club is still a paid sampling program. I think, you know, to Robert's point, wineries are looking to be smarter about it. They're looking to differentiate, whether they're adding, you know, farm to table, you know, packages almost like Blue Apron or such, whether they're partnering with art or tying themselves closer with restaurants and the synergy that's going on. I think that the evolution is accelerating on what direct to consumer should be. To be very clear, it's very disadvantaged for a consumer to go buy directly from a winery. They only go to a winery for two simple facts. One, products they cannot get in market. Two, because they have an emotional relationship with the winery, generally created when someone had visited that location, to your point earlier, right? So those are really the two functional roles. And how do you differentiate and create a customer journey where you're having them come back again and again? It's interesting, besides just the wines every year. You know, you either go to a retailer, we have a lot of selection, you have better price, you have better shipping advantages. There's all kinds of direct to consumer advantages on a retail level versus a winery direct. You know, the good news about winery direct consumer, all of the margin release that occurs there, and it's actually very synergistic with our 3-tier business or our broad market business internationally. You know, that data feedback loop is fundamental for us to understand our customers. And actually, if you look outside of wine, they've been moving direct consumer very quickly if you're paying attention to that. So Nike over the last 6 years has moved up, almost to 40%, Robert, on direct consumer, and their digital budget is extraordinary because that feedback loop is helping them build a better business and supporting their activities in market. I always tell the story about this Hint Water in Northern California. I think it's about $180 million water company where 40% of its water is sold direct to consumer. If a water company can do it, we can do it. I know that they have less restrictions about, you know, the legalities and everything, but it's not an easy purchase to purchase a heavy case of water and have it shipped 3 or 5 cases to your house. There is something that's very fascinating about wine that not a lot of people talk about in the direct consumer business, is that what we want from direct consumer is actually ahead of every other business in the world. You know, we don't use digital tools, but what we're asking from direct consumer, we're actually leaning to a very omni-channel kind of capacity, meaning that we sell online, we sell through subscription models, and we sell hospitality/tasting room/retail. There's no other retail business that covers that surface area like wine does in the world. There's no other, it's not clothes, there's not cheese. That's a fascinating problem because we want to know when that wine club member logs onto a website. We want to know who they are when they walk into the tasting room to see how much they purchased since the last time they visited us. That's a very avant-garde thinking, but we haven't invested in the channel, the tools, or the people to understand how to unlock that. I think that's one of the fascinating phenomenons that we don't really acknowledge in the challenge of wine DTC.
Yeah. Mariette, if I may.
Sandra, yes, absolutely. Please add to that, Sandra.
I think there's one point we're all struggling when we try to have a global level of wine tourism as well, which is data. And I think also when we talk about, technology and that connection with the consumer, that's key, because not only for obviously the business and the running of the business, but for the destination, and having that information aggregated for the destination to actually be able to funnel their planning, their development, their investments, and at global level for us to do advocacy for the sector. Because if we're going to do that advocacy, we need to know what does it mean, how many people are traveling. And we actually started a project now, which is trying to look into what countries are collecting wine tourism data and how they're doing it, and it's very limited. There's no way you can compare. So also there's if we invest more in that digital space and build up the data, I think that's going to be useful not only at obviously a business level, but also for the destination, for the country, and for us as a wine tourism sector
Sandra,
overall.
With that data, can I just interrupt for a second, saying that there's so much data collection happening with so many large companies, US based, you can go buy data from Foursquare that can tell you who's visiting South Africa, because it's the underbelly, it's the meta layer across multiple apps. We did a project with Foursquare where it showed where people shopped before they bought wine and where they shopped after, which is fascinating. How many people came? They also measured everyone that came to Napa Valley before the fires, during the fires, and after the fires. and a significant amount of data unlocking. That data is accessible to all of us. We have to just invest and surface it. These are big companies that have been doing this for a very long time and are beyond experts at it. In fact, if you look at the Foursquare stats right now, they're showing how people are moving around in COVID and where the travel is happening. So I think that we just have to go to the places where the data is instead of trying to create a data source and having the tourist destinations, which are not equipped. And I'm friends with the Napa Valley tourism. They're just not built for it. Go on, Robert.
Sorry.
Yes, Sandra?
Yeah, no, I just wanted, I think you're right, but I think we face the same challenge in all the sectors, which is companies have it. Sometimes it's not public or it's expensive. And also the issue is that data should also inform public investment decisions, because it's not just the company. Am I going to build a road? Am I going to help, have other investments? Am I going to limit the number of hotels I want in this region to avoid too many people? What is my strategy of managing seasonality, for example? And I think we can't do that unless we have the private sector data being also, I won't say owned, but co-owned in a public-private sector structure. And also at the global level, I think many destinations are very advanced, but for example, you can't compare countries, for example, because you have companies doing it, but then you can't say, okay, this is what's happening, comparing Spain, Portugal, different parts of the world. So I think there is a challenge of making that data sharing something which is valuable for everyone.
100%. Robert?
Looking more broadly than at wine, if you've got data that says X people go to Paris every year, or Y people go to Ibiza or whatever, it's very easy to say, oh, people are going to Ibiza because they want to take drugs and dance. Well, yes, some people go to Ibiza because they want to take drugs and dance. Other people are middle class, middle-aged people who want to sit on the beach and they drink a beer and that's all they do. But we have that data for Ibiza. Now, if we look at wine, we're not very good at thinking about why different people are looking at or drinking wine or buying wine and so on. And we say, oh, well, he is spending $100 or $200 on wine, therefore he must be a connoisseur, or therefore he must be showing off, or she must be showing off, whatever. I think we need far more sophistication in the way we're looking at the data. And then when it comes to the tourism, we can understand a lot more how to tailor the offers plural that we're making to different cohorts of visitors. And I think that this stretches way across the tourism and wine sectors into the retail sector and the experiential sector. I don't know how you, Sandra, throw the ball to you at that.
No, totally. I think it's basically what you were saying as well, not the motivations, and then understanding the consumer and bringing that up to the level of building something common. You were saying about interactions with other value chain players. It's about, do I bring the values of the community to the winery, and do I bring the winery out to the community as well? And one of the things that I think also is a challenge now with COVID impact is events and wine tourism around events. It's something that was building stronger and stronger in many destinations, and there will be limitations probably in the short term to have gatherings of people around wine fests or wine events. So I think the issue is always, how do we look at it from a systemic point of view, and all the players need to have their part. I think it's great, again, that we have data, and I think if the wineries work with their destination, then their destination can help them be better. And instead of all of them maybe offering the same experiences as you were mentioning and competing with each other for a tourist that will only visit 1.5 winery, as you mentioned, they can say, okay, you're better in this, so I'm going to position myself here. I'm better in bringing the cheese experience because I really have a fantastic partnership with a cheese producer. So I'm going to, my bulk of my experiences will be this. I think that the data challenge is something that's not just on this sector. It's very much something we face in tourism. And I always have the bad habit of saying that other consumer brands and sectors are much more sophisticated than we are in understanding and working with consumers. And I think we still have a long way to go as tourism players in that area.
Absolutely, and I think your point around how we need to start working together within regions. Collaboration is the only way forward on this, and we've been working in silos as the wine industry and the tourism industry for a long time. I mean, Paul, you tweeted this morning about the comment that our dear friend Andre from Portugal made around restaurants, and that restaurants are just completely underutilized, as a channel for us to not just sell wine, but to actually tell the story about wine and wine tourism and the source of where it comes from. And certainly South Africa is no exemption to this. When you go to a restaurant, really the only interaction there with the brand behind the wine is someone just pouring you the wine into a glass. There's no other exchange really that happens. And often that wine comes at a premium price as well at the restaurant. So, when we talk about this microcosm and pulling together, the other point is around tour operators working within the industry. There's not a real genuine relationship often between tour operator, winery, restaurant. I would like some thoughts around how we utilize places like restaurants and tour operators, and we build a stronger collaboration network, not just from a data capturing perspective, but more in terms of also how do we build this local economy of wine tourism. Robert?
I met a lady on a plane who is a tour operator for the golf world. And she organizes people wanting to follow the PGA tours, have to book up through her in the country that she worked in. And I said, so what do you do? And also she does tours for people who want to play golf every day. And I said, so what do you do with the time that they're not playing golf? And also very often they might have partners who don't play golf. And she said, well, we have to do the work to go and find the other things. And that might, in a place like South Africa, involve vineyards, wineries, farms. And I said, so do you get approached as you're in a list of the people who organize these sort of things. Do you get approached by the wine industry to say, hey, you've got people coming to play golf. Can we accommodate these people? And by the way, there's somebody else who does garden tours, and there's somebody else who does other things. And she said, no, she's never heard from an organization or a winery. It's always been, she has had to go out to reach out to these people. And you stop and think, hold on, people who play golf have money, that they're a wonderful target audience. And yet we're sort of waiting, standing back, waiting for them to come to us. And that was just a 10-minute conversation on an airplane. But to me, I think it opened all sorts of thoughts to me about how much more we could be doing in terms of being proactive. And your point about restaurants, I think, is very well made. But how much more broadly can we go than that?
Paul?
I think the restaurants are fundamental. I think that we've abdicated our relationship with them to spirits and beer in a significant way, for a lot of reasons. Look, trial leads to loyalty. And they're the front lines of trial without question across the world. And also we provide, on a per purchase basis, much more profit to them. And that's a synergistic relationship that we've forgotten about somehow and not really leaned into the same way that we did in the past. I'm not sure what that looks like. I have to say, I don't have a good answer for you. I can tell you that there's thousands of sommeliers out of work right now in the United States, looking to find ways to connect. Our industry should be first and foremost trying to do even half of what Ryan Reynolds did from Aviation Gin, where he, sponsored bartenders and really made a concerted effort to show that he cared about that category, because that's the front lines for us. And it will be a post-COVID again. And look, sommeliers have become less relevant in restaurants for a myriad of reasons. I'm not sure. They're also still the stars of restaurants. They're fundamental. There are tasting room staff to some degree nationally. Like I said, we've maybe it's distance, maybe it's the amount of customers, maybe it's the turnover, but we don't create long-term relationships with a lot of those sommeliers to perpetuate and retain our business. And I think that that's part of our problem in the wine industry. We're always chasing the new sale. We're not retaining the old sale, and that's fundamental. And both in direct consumer and 3-tier, or in broad market, I'm sorry. I get mixed up with the United States phraseology there, but we definitely need to lean back in this. This is something that, we have to learn an old skill again, which is that customer retention is the most important street. And it's so obvious right now, as we're looking at US wineries, that database that they have is what's going to keep them alive and we're coming out, I think, in a few weeks out of COVID right now, theoretically. But my fear in the United States is that, first of all, we're a mess. Let's just be clear. We can attribute that to our Orange King. But the reality of it is that we're not out of the woods yet. It's growing all over the place. And, tourism itself is asking people to come here, some of them with COVID, some of them without. That's a pretty risky, challenging, terrible thing to think about when you actually ask yourself, are we going to sit with thermometers and measure people's temperature coming into the valley? It's a really fundamental thing that we have to ask ourselves in ecotourism in general. We bring people to us to expose them to our place, but with a pandemic, we're exposing ourselves to a lot of risk.
Absolutely. I think it's uncharted territory. It's immensely complex for governments to navigate, for the private sector to navigate. And I think the most important thing right now, as you say, is to focus our energy on our existing clients and how do we reaffirm our relationships with them in the market and be vulnerable about the fact that we don't know where we're going. We don't have the answers. This is new terrain for all of us. And, I think it's very important for us to become a lot more real as business in general, as a sector in general, and more human as well about this very tricky space that we are navigating collectively as a world. There's not a corner in this world that's not been touched by this and that won't be disrupted. So as Sandra said earlier, it's an opportunity for us to rebuild and rethink that. And Paul, before we start wrapping up, I want to just come back to Sandra as we start sharing. We've heard from the industry that a desperate need to hear a message of hope and to hear that, and we can't guarantee that things will be better necessarily, but we do know that people will travel again. And as Paul said, whether that means that we're going to be walking around with, thermometers and looking and checking people's temperature, and that check-in times at airports will be extended with another few hours so that we can also get through the health and safety checks. We don't know, but we know that people will travel. What, Sandra, is a few pieces of advice that you have for wine regions, and not just for businesses, but for wine regions to do as part of their recovery plan that will help them lead the pack and fast track their recovery? We now have the opportunity for destinations that have been behind for a long time to potentially fast track and be some of the first ones to recover post lockdown.
Thank you, Mariette. I think that comes to the point that actually Paul was making about inviting people to the destination. I think the first point is coordination, and because the traveler has a journey that starts at home, ends at the destination, and the touch points are so segmented that if I don't have information about my cancellation policies, for example, which are totally changed now, this is important. If I don't have information of what is my right if I get sick while I travel, where I'm at a destination, if I'm going to be quarantined, who's going to be in charge of making me a room available for 2 weeks if I need to be quarantined, if I'm sick at the destination, what health procedures have been put in place by the destination in terms of transport, in terms of the wine visit, in terms of the hotel. So, and that cannot happen unless there's a coordinated effort. And again, public, private sector, public sector, because at the end there's different government layers that act within the process. So I think it's a moment for coordination and cooperation at all levels. I think technology has come up here, and I'll reinforce that. I think it's a moment of opportunity to invest and train people in technology, in new systems that we've spoke about through all the ecosystem. And I think there's a moment to rethink your own supply and destination in what the new changes will be. In the beginning, I was saying, and I think Robert said this, we don't know how this is going to change. You know, there's a lot of talk about, oh, we will see changes. And if we look back at previous crises, we did see acceleration of trends that we already were seeing. And probably this is, again, what we might see here. But we're in the middle of the storm. So we don't know how we're going to go out of it and how consumers will behave exactly. I think in the short term, definitely proximity and domestic market will be key. Visiting friends and relatives, as you were saying in the beginning, I think that's a very important and interesting target market. Small groups, small people who were confined together, so the risk is lower of contamination as well. So I think very targeted, and again, the brands that were in contact with the consumer during this period will be an advantage. And I think this is a very important point, that they don't go out of consumers' mind. Either it's a webinar, either it's saying every week, you can buy online. I think that connection, if it wasn't there, needs to be made as soon as possible.
Perfect. Now is not the time to go silent. Paula, I want to just jump back quickly onto technology. And we are going to have a session this afternoon looking at virtual in more detail. But I want to kind of whet the appetite for our attendees and from around the world, and just hear your thoughts on augmented reality and virtual reality and wine tourism.
Yeah, look, we live in a mixed reality world already. You pull out your phone and you're using Google Maps when you walk down the street trying to find a restaurant or a location. There's a myriad of tools that we use already that are combined, and the digital space is connecting with us in ways we forget about. And we have the Library of Alexandria in our pocket. We're all geniuses. I do think that if you've ever done an augmented reality or a virtual reality experience, it's pretty fantastic. I'm scared of heights. I just climbed a mountain the other day with the Oculus, the inexpensive one. And oh man, I was sweating, and I'm standing on the floor. I swore I was going to die, even though I was, I don't know what that looks like. The tools, we're a little ahead of it for tourism. I don't know how that, but smart people will lean into it, because the reality of it is that the growth of our market, the ability to touch people, is not getting them to fly to our location, sadly. That's an expensive, difficult, challenging endeavor with limited space and footprint. The ability to touch them in their homes. And that could be a myriad of ways. It could be old school, a catalog that you're sending them. It could be, simply a handwritten card. I mean, there's a lot of ways to break the paradigm. It's almost in vogue to send a handwritten card now in a digital era, right? In some ways. But what I love about those tools, like I said, is that they are touching the customer where they live, where they are. That's one of the reasons I love 19 Crimes. It was the first ever application that touched the buyer, not a consumer, a buyer at the point of purchase. They were scanning that label in a restaurant, in a retail environment. And we should take lessons from that. And we should learn from that how we can touch customers more often and more frequently. So I'm excited about those features. I mean, the technology is getting better all the time. They have a new Oculus Rift coming out this year that's going to be smaller. Soon it'll be like, the Google eyeglasses. It'll be very fascinating to see how this plays out, and we watch our children extend into it. I mean, just alone the smartphones since 2006, look how amazing they are since they were in that first iPhone that we ever did. Look how great e-commerce is, or customer support, or artificial intelligence. It's accelerating around us faster and faster. And by the way, it's going to accelerate even faster now, because we need those tools even more so. And we're going to be leaning heavily into those tools over the next 18 months for a myriad of reasons, right? Remote work, etc.
Absolutely. So we will see a fast track. And I love that point about the need to touch more people at home, and not to be arrogant to think that they should come to us, because they don't need to. There is a million of brands to select from. And how are we making the effort to reach people where they are at? And that's not just a physical place, but it's also a psychological and a mental place. And in a place like South Africa, where we know the majority of our local market, we have not reached. And we've been arrogant in that process. We've been arrogant to assume that we are fine with just the less than 2% of the market share we have locally, and that we have the international market, and that's fine. And we're now starting to understand and value the importance of building a local market and converting more South Africans to drink our wine and to value our wine and to buy wine at a better price point, etc. But they don't need to come to our wineries or dine in our restaurants. What are we doing to bring wine to them and tell the story of wine in a way that it's not overwhelming, complicated, or arrogant, but that it's accessible, it's real, it's honest, and it's in their language and the culture and the understanding of local citizens. So I think that is for me, a very important takeout from today is let's touch people at home and use the tools that's been around for a long time. And it's not necessarily about spending another $1 million on a brand new interface, but to work with what we've got more smarter and wiser. Robert.
Sorry, I think tourism is the tower on the hill, is my opinion about it. I think that, that meeting the regular wine consumer at their home is something, but tourism is very special, right? To get someone, there's the local market, right? And there's that capacity, but just think about when you want to go to the Maldives, or if you want to visit Paris, or, these trips that you make in your life that are monumental. And tourism is part of that. It's that special moment that someone's going on their vacation, on their with their best friends for a long tour on a bucket list. I think we should really remember that that's really part of the magic of what we do. And and if you think about us, and I hate people that hate when you compare, tourism with Disneyland. It should be like Disneyland. Disneyland is perfect. Disneyland is magical. I mean, it doesn't have traffic the way they help you bust your way around. They make lines worth standing, and they're always trying to improve that experience. There's never trash around there. That's how our community should reflect our industry when people fly to this place all the way across the world to come to it, or even if they're 90 miles away, which is not a high frequency visitation, right? Because they're going to go home and they want to remember that for another 18 months before they travel again. So
100%. That first touch point should be in someone's home. The ultimate goal is to get them to come and experience not just the wine at source, but the people and the hospitality and the environment that's made that terroir so interesting. And that should be the ultimate message. And how we build that starts with that very first story and that very first interaction, sometimes online. So, Robert, is there a message of hope?
There's lots of hope, and I'd like to give a couple of shout outs to people that I admire in the wine business. One is a lady a lot of you may have met called Diana Isaac from Winerist, who we had on a real business and wine session, who said, her whole business is taking people on wine tourism trips, and her whole business disappeared. The whole year, gone. So what did she do? And she said, well, we pivoted, that word that we're hearing a lot now. And we started to actually think about sending bottles of wine from the wineries that people would have been visiting to the people to drink at home, quite possibly with something that they could look at on their iPad or on their phone or whatever. So yes, you're not having the experience that you were going to have, but you're getting something like it. I've been watching National Theatre productions at home because the National Theatre has been putting on its plays, so we can watch them on television. There's all sorts of different ways of approaching it. So that first thing is think outside the box and think, what could I do that I've not been doing? And then that leads me to my second one, which is 67 Pall Mall, the London club that, again, a lot of you've heard of. They're now doing 35 tastings a week, virtual tastings. They were among the first to do it, and they're probably doing more than anyone else. That's not the clever thing. The clever thing was that it took them about a week to set it up, but from the beginning, they've been sending out small samples of the wine for you to taste along with the wine that's in the tasting. And there, what you get is a 75 milliliter, that's a tenth of a bottle, sample of each of the wines, 6 of them. And this London restaurant, wine club, whatever you want to call it, actually, they got together and said, how can we do it? And they got canisters of argon. They bought these little bottles and they set up where the restaurant tables and chairs and all it's all been cleared out. And there's now a big bottling line where you've got sommeliers and others literally filling bottles, putting in some argon and so on, and sending out on DHL these packs, and I can get 6 packs of great Burgundy or great South African wine or whatever and taste along with the person on the screen. Now, it's taken us God knows how long. All wine in shops is in 75 centiliter bottles. Why does it have to be in those heavy, environmentally unfriendly zones? Why is it taking us so long to start thinking about, actually, why can't we give people the experience in a different way?
Exactly. No fun watching a virtual wine tasting and not being able to drink wine with the people tasting the wine. We've got to make it more inclusive. So I think that's an incredibly good idea.
So to me, just start thinking. In Diana's case, there was no real, she had to keep her business going, but I don't think there was a lot of investment in her case. In the case of 67 Pall Mall, yes, they had some money behind them, but I don't think there were millions of dollars spent on that. That was just a waking up thinking, how can we look at this differently? And I think that a lot of people are going to do very well out of it. Every crisis, there are always winners and there are always losers. And I think the people who are looking outside the old route are going to do well. But I just want to quickly, because I heard it yesterday, and I want to give it as a quick plea to anyone in South Africa who's thinking this way. I asked somebody yesterday, what are you going to do moving on? He said, we make our wine biodynamically, and I want to focus on health and want to focus on how healthy our wine is. Please don't do that, because basically what we are making is alcohol. Alcohol is unhealthy. We don't like it when the doctors who are saving our lives at the moment, tell us how unhealthy alcohol is, of all kinds. You start going on about how my Cabernet Sauvignon or my Sauvignon Blanc is good for you, you are going to get that coming back at you by the load of stones. So please, you can talk about sustainability, you can talk about biodiversity, talk about all sorts of stuff, but please leave the health argument in its box.
Good point there. And on that note, thank you, Robert. Paul, any last thoughts from you before we hand over to Sandra to end today's session for us?
No, I think that this is the time for us to build, I think would be the key thing. I think that we're looking at the world in a different way, and it's our time to catch up and really invest into tomorrow, because, we've let ourselves allow the technology to pass us, and all these things that are happening around us. It's our time to catch up and really take the mantle and really bring wine back to the masses and make it a special product as well as one for everybody, that big tent that Robert talks about.
Fantastic. Thank you. And have a good short sleep. We thank you for joining us such an ungodly hour of the night. Sandra.
Thank you, Mariette, for the invitation.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Sandra?
Thank you. I'll just leave a last word. I think I'll reinforce the issue of collaboration. I think thinking out of the box means that other people from other sectors also need to collaborate. And I think we learn a lot from different multi-silo approach. And I think we need to get out of our own box to be able to build better and to go through this one.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. And thank you for our attendees from all over the world that joined us at all times of the day and the night. We appreciate it. We remind you that the next session starts at 2:00 South African time, and we're going virtual. We're going to talk about virtual events and whether they're even feasible and how we can make them more real and human. Thank you so much for all the insights shared by our panelists, and we'll chat to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.